Hi, I'm Noelle Whitaker, a 29-year-old art curator from Miami. A year ago, I was madly in love and engaged to marry into one of New York's most powerful real estate families. Now, I know what you're probably picturing as sunshine, beaches, a laid-back vibe. And yeah, that's Miami. But my life was about to take a sharp turn north, right into the heart of a different kind of heat, the kind that melts gilded cages and exposes everything they try to hide. When I met Marcus Van Allen, it felt like fate. He was everything I thought I wanted: charming, intelligent, successful. He flew me up to New York, wined and dined me in places I'd only ever seen in magazines. He made me feel like I was the most important person in the world, like I belonged on that level. We had this whirlwind romance, and everything was perfect. I thought I was stepping into a fairy tale, the kind they write books about. Picture it. The Florida girl marries the New York elite. A classic story, right? But like all fairy tales, there was a hidden clause. And mine came in the form of a prenuptial agreement. Just weeks before the wedding, 2 weeks to be exact, a crisp, imposing document was placed in front of me. It wasn't written in ink, it felt written in stone, cold and unyielding. The terms were simple, brutally simple. If we divorced, I would leave with nothing. Absolutely nothing. No assets, no alimony, no shred of financial support. It wasn't a negotiation. It was an ultimatum. Sign, or don't get married. There was no explanation given, no softening of the blow. Just the stark reality of their expectations. Handed to me, a woman who was supposed to be marrying their son, their heir. I was heartbroken, gutted. It felt like a physical blow, a punch to the stomach that stole my breath. All those dreams, all that love, reduced to a few pages of legal jargon designed to strip me bare. What was I supposed to do? Walk away from the man I loved, the life I thought we were building? Or sacrifice my independence, my future security, for a chance at happily ever after? But something inside me shifted in that moment. The heartbreak was real, yes, but beneath it, a flicker ignited. A spark of defiance. They thought they had me cornered, exposed, powerless. They mistook my love for weakness, my quiet nature for naivete. They saw a girl from Florida, an art curator, someone easily dismissed. And so I signed it. Without a word, I picked up the pen and signed the document that they believed would ensure my silence and my eventual departure with nothing. They watched, I'm sure, expecting tears, pleading, some kind of emotional outburst. But I gave them nothing, just a signature. Because what they didn't know was that I had a plan, a quiet, carefully constructed plan that had been in motion for years, unfolding beneath their radar. While they were busy calculating their percentages and safeguarding their inherited millions, I was building my own foundation, brick by brick. Have you, Eve, been overlooked or underestimated? Have people judged you based on where you come from, what you do, or who you appear to be? Tell me about it in the comments below. I read every single one. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel, because trust me, this story gets wild. You won't want to miss how I went from being told to leave with nothing to walking away with 25 million euros and a whole lot of satisfaction. Get comfortable, because the show is just beginning, so let's rewind a bit. Before the prenup, before the drama, there was Marcus. Picture this. I'm in Miami doing my thing, immersed in the vibrant art scene. And then he walks in. Marcus Van Allen, he was magnetic. Tall, with that confident New York swagger, dressed impeccably. He was everything I thought a man from that world would be, but with a warmth that felt genuine. He had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. Our first date was at this incredible gallery opening. He knew so much about art, or at least, he knew how to talk about it in a way that impressed me. He listened when I spoke about my passion for undiscovered artists, the thrill of finding something truly special. He made me laugh easily, and he looked at me like I was the most interesting woman he'd ever met. The romance was a whirlwind. Weekends in New York, flying down to Miami for impromptu visits, late-night conversations that seemed to flow effortlessly. He was attentive, generous, and he made me feel cherished. He talked about a future together, a life filled with adventure and shared experiences. He painted a picture so vivid, so compelling that I completely fell for it. I fell for him. He introduced me to his world gradually. Dinners at exclusive restaurants, charity galas where everyone seemed to know his name, weekends at their sprawling estate in the Hamptons. It was a world of immense wealth and privilege, a world I had only ever seen from the outside. And Marcus navigated it with such ease, such confidence. He seemed to fit in perfectly, effortlessly. He told me he loved me, truly loved me, and asked me to marry him after only a few months. It felt fast, maybe, but when you're in the middle of a romance like that, it feels right. Like you finally found the piece you didn't even know was missing. I said yes without hesitation. I envisioned our life together, building a family, exploring the world, supporting each other's dreams. I genuinely believed in the future he was promising me. But even then, beneath the glamorous surface, I started to notice things. Small things at first, easily dismissed. A brief, sharp tone when he spoke to a waiter, a subtle eye roll when his mother called, a carefully constructed answer about his business that felt a little too rehearsed. They were like tiny cracks in the polished facade, barely visible but unsettling. These cracks seemed to widen whenever his family was around. Marcus changed, subtly, but noticeably. Lie. The easygoing, charming man I fell in love with would become more guarded, more calculating. It was like he was putting on a different mask for them, one of ambition and stoicism. And the way he interacted with them, the subtle power dynamics, the unspoken expectations. It was a whole different world. A world that felt much colder than the one he had created for me. I knew his family was important to him, of course, and I tried to understand their influence. But the way he seemed to shrink or perhaps adapt himself around them was concerning. It was as if the true Marcus, the one I knew and loved, was being overshadowed by the family dynasty he was a part of. And as we got closer to the wedding and closer to his family, those cracks in the mask of love became harder and harder to ignore. They were a preview of what was to come, a subtle warning that I didn't quite understand then. But I would. Meeting Marcus's family was like walking into a museum exhibit where everything was perfectly curated, beautiful to look at, but utterly lifeless. The air in their Fifth Avenue penthouse was thick with old money and even older attitudes. They were the Van Allens, a name synonymous with New York real estate, power, and pedigree. Vivian Van Allen, Marcus's mother, was the matriarch. Imagine a woman carved from ice and draped in the finest silk. Her smile was a social reflex, never reaching her sharp, assessing eyes. She had a way of looking through you, not at you, as if you were a piece of dust on their antique furniture. She was obsessed with appearances, with lineage, with maintaining the pristine image of the Van Allen dynasty. And from the moment she met me, I could tell she saw me as an intrusion, an anomaly in their carefully constructed world. Charles Van Allen, his father, was quieter, more reserved, but no less formidable. He had a firm handshake and a gaze that seemed to weigh your worth in decimal points. He controlled the family's vast wealth with an iron fist, and he treated me with a kind of distant, almost patronizing politeness. It was the politeness you'd extend to a charity case, someone who was fortunate enough to be in their presence, but certainly not their equal. They addressed me with a tone that said, "Isn't it sweet that Marcus is marrying her?" They made no real effort to get to know me. They asked superficial questions about Miami, about my work, but the interest wasn't genuine. It was a performance, a polite interrogation. Vivian would make veiled comments about my background, my family, the stark contrast between my life and theirs. "Oh dear," she'd say, "it must be quite the adjustment coming from." Well, they viewed me as a small-town nobody, ill-equipped for their upper-crust ivory tower, someone who could potentially tarnish their carefully polished image. Despite their chilly reception, I tried. I really did. I brought them thoughtful gifts. I engaged in conversations about our interests. I dressed the part, trying to fit into their world. I genuinely hoped that over time, they would see that I wasn't after their money or their status, that I genuinely loved their son. I wanted to be accepted, to be a part of the family I was about to marry into. I wanted that fairy tale to be real, but their walls were too high, their prejudices too ingrained. Every polite smile felt like a challenge, every conversation a subtle power play. They were polished, yes, but also cold and calculating. The warmth I saw in Marcus, the man I fell in love with, seemed to evaporate whenever his parents were around, replaced by a tight-lipped tension. And as the wedding date drew closer, the subtle jabs and condescension intensified. It was clear they were unhappy with Marcus's choice, and they weren't afraid to show it. They wanted to make it clear that I was an outsider, and that I would remain an outsider, no matter what. Looking back, I see they were laying the groundwork, preparing me, in their own unpleasant way, for what was to come. They were reinforcing their power, reminding me of my perceived insignificance in their world. They were setting the stage for the ultimate power move, the one they believed would truly put me in my place and protect their precious dynasty. They were building the gilded cage, ready to trap me inside. And then they dropped the bomb. The prenup. The ultimate declaration that I was not, and would never be, one of them. That I was merely a temporary fixture, someone they wanted to ensure would leave with nothing. Little did they know, their attempt to control me would be their undoing. The wedding was 2 weeks away. Everything was planned, the invitation sent, the dress fitted. I was buzzing with a mix of excitement and pre-wedding jitters. I had pushed the Van Allen family's coldness to the back of my mind, focusing on the man I was about to marry, the life I was building with Marcus. Then came the call. Marcus's lawyer, a stern-faced man named Mr. Sterling who seemed perpetually clad in expensive gray suits. He requested a private meeting. Alone. I went, a little confused but assuming it was just some final legal paperwork. Perhaps something about the wedding license, or a formality. But the moment I stepped into his hushed, overly formal office, I knew something was wrong. The air was heavy, the silence oppressive. Mr. Sterling didn't offer small talk. He simply gestured to a seat and then, without preamble, slid a thick document across the polished desk. It was a prenuptial agreement. My heart sank. I knew, of course, that prenups were common in their world. But somehow, in my romantic bubble, I hadn't truly expected one. And I certainly hadn't expected this one. I started to read it, my eyes scanning the dense legal text. The language was cold, clinical, utterly without compassion. It stated, in no uncertain terms, that in the event of divorce, I would be entitled to nothing. No share of assets, no alimony, no financial support of any kind. It was a complete and total exclusion. Every paragraph seemed designed to sever any potential claim I might have to their wealth. It was brutal. An outright declaration that my worth in their eyes was exactly zero, at least financially. It felt like they were saying, "You are marrying our son, yes, but you are not joining us. You are a temporary guest, and when you leave empty-handed." I looked up at Mr. Sterling, my voice barely a whisper. "What is this?" He adjusted his spectacles, his expression unreadable. "It's a standard prenuptial agreement, Ms. Whitaker. Mr. and Mrs. Van Allen are very particular about these matters. Standard? This wasn't standard. This was a dismantling of everything I believed Marcus and I were building. I felt a knot of panic tighten in my stomach. "Where's Marcus?" I asked. "Mr. Van Allen is aware of this meeting," Mr. Sterling replied flatly. Later, I confronted Marcus. He was apologetic, but also dismissive. He said it was just a formality, standard procedure for a family like his. He claimed his parents were the ones insisting on these terms, that it was their way of protecting the family legacy. He didn't seem to understand the depth of my hurt, the feeling of being reduced to a potential financial liability, someone to be guarded against. He just kept repeating, "It's what they want, Noel. We just have to sign it, and then it's over. It won't change how I feel about you." But it did change things. It changed everything. It was a stark reminder of the cracks I had seen, the cold reality beneath the charm. It showed me where his true loyalties lay, or at least, where they needed to appear to lie to his family. I was heartbroken. I cried. I pleaded. I tried to make him understand how deeply this cut. But he couldn't or wouldn't. He just needed me to sign. Just sign here. After hours of agonizing, of feeling utterly defeated and trapped, I made my decision. I looked at the pen Mr. Sterling had offered me, lying on the cold desk. My hand trembled slightly. I thought about the wedding, about the man I loved, about the future I had envisioned. And then I thought about the Van Allens, their cold smiles, their thinly veiled disdain. I thought about how much they underestimated me. how much they assumed I was at their mercy. So I picked up the pen, and I signed it, without another word, without a single tear or dramatic protest. I just signed the paper that declared I would leave with nothing, because they were right in one sense. I would leave. But it wouldn't be because they forced me out empty-handed. It would be on my terms, and I would leave with far more than they could ever imagine taking from me. They didn't know it then, but their cruel attempt to disempower me was the very thing that sealed their fate. Because I had a secret. A secret they were completely unaware of, a secret that changed everything. They saw me as the girl from Miami, the art curator, a decorative addition to their family lineage, easily discarded if things didn't work out. They saw my upbringing, which was comfortable but certainly not on their level of inherited wealth, as a sign of my needing them, of my dependency. They believed the prenup was their ultimate protection against someone like me. Someone they perceived as a potential gold digger, though they would never use such a crude term out loud. Their disdain was more subtle, more ingrained in their very being. What they didn't see, what Marcus didn't see, was the fire that had always burned beneath the surface. Growing up, I learned the value of hard work, of resourcefulness. I had a passion for art, yes, but I also had a keen eye for value, for opportunity. My career as an art curator wasn't just about appreciating beauty. It was about understanding markets, identifying trends, making strategic acquisitions. While they were busy inheriting their wealth, I was quietly building my own expertise, my own network, my own understanding of how value is created and preserved. Years before I even met Marcus, I had started dabbling in investments. Nothing huge at first, just small, calculated risks. I focused on undervalued fine art, pieces that had the potential to appreciate significantly. I spent hours researching artists, tracking market trends, attending auctions. It was a slow, steady process, requiring patience and a willingness to trust my instincts. Then, I moved into the world of crypto assets. Again, starting small, learning the landscape, understanding the potential. It was volatile, yes, but the potential for growth was undeniable. I saw it as a modern form of collecting, acquiring digital assets with the hope of future appreciation. Most people dismissed it as a passing fad, but I saw the underlying technology, the potential for disruption. So while the Van Allens were living their lives of predictable wealth, I was quietly building a diverse portfolio, a hidden safety net. A safety net that grew beyond my wildest expectations thanks to an unexpected turn of events. My late grandmother, Leah Monnet, who lived in Paris, was a fiercely independent woman with a passion for both art and unconventional investments. I knew she had some wealth, but I had no idea of its true extent. Shortly before I signed that brutal prenup, after all the terms had been finalized and agreed upon, or rather, dictated, I received news of her passing. And that's when the true scale of her legacy became clear. Grandma Leah had left me her entire private investment trust. A trust that contained not only a stunning collection of fine art pieces I had only dreamed of owning, but also a significant amount of crypto assets, some of which had recently experienced a phenomenal surge in value thanks to an unexpected NFT windfall. The total value? A staggering 25 million euros. 25 million euros. Just like that. Inherited from a grandmother who trusted me, who believed in my ability to manage wealth, who knew the value of quiet strength. This was after the prenup, after I had agreed to leave with nothing. The timing felt almost poetic, a cosmic joke played on the Van Allens. This wealth was entirely separate from anything related to Marcus or his family. It was mine, earned through Grandma Leah's foresight and my own quiet efforts, and inherited just when their attempts to control my financial future were at their peak. Vivian, Charles, Marcus. Not one of them had the slightest clue about my grandmother's wealth or my own burgeoning portfolio. They saw me as a woman with a modest career, eager to marry into their world for financial security. They had completely underestimated me. Utterly and completely. And that lack of knowledge, that blind spot born of their arrogance and condescension, became my greatest weapon. They had built their gilded cage, complete with an escape clause designed to leave me penniless. But they had no idea I was already holding the key to my own, far grander, exit strategy. They thought they were protecting their fortress, but I was already a Trojan horse, ready to dismantle it from the inside, armed with a secret worth millions. Each wedding day arrived like a perfectly orchestrated performance. It was a spectacle of wealth and power, a royal display designed to solidify the Van Allen's place at the top of the social hierarchy. The venue was breathtaking, a grand ballroom dripping with chandeliers, the air perfumed with expensive flowers and anticipation. The guests were a who's who of New York's elite, their whispers a constant hum of old money and hushed gossip. I was dressed in a flawless white gown, the kind of dress little girls dream of. My hair was styled perfectly, my makeup professionally applied. On the surface, I looked like the blushing bride, ready to embark on her happily ever after. And I played the part. I smiled, I greeted guests, I posed for photographs. But beneath the surface, a different emotion stirred. It wasn't the pure joy of a woman marrying the man she loved. It was something far more complex, a potent mix of sadness, resolve, and a quiet anticipation. As I walked down the aisle on my father's arm, the classical music swelling around me, I looked at Marcus waiting at the altar. He looked handsome, every bit the confident heir. He smiled at me, a smile that seemed to flicker with relief that I had signed the prenup and everything was proceeding as planned. In that moment, walking towards him, surrounded by their world of smoke and champagne, I wasn't thinking about our vows or our future as a couple, at least not in the way I had originally imagined. I was thinking about the prenup, about the coldness of his family, about the inheritance they knew nothing about. I was thinking about their certainty that they held all the power, that they had protected themselves from any potential threat I might pose. And that's when I truly understood what I was doing. I wasn't just marrying Marcus. I was marrying into the Van Allen family, into their carefully constructed kingdom built on old money and hidden secrets. But I wasn't entering it as a powerless outsider. I was entering it as a strategist, armed with knowledge and resources they couldn't fathom. My smile as I walked down the aisle wasn't just for the cameras or for Marcus. It was the smile of a woman who knew she was stepping into a trap, not as the victim, but as the architect of its eventual dismantling. It was a smile that held a secret, a promise of reckoning. While the guests sipped champagne and congratulated the happy couple, oblivious to the undercurrents, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The performance had begun. I was inside the gilded cage, but I wasn't trapped. I was gathering information, observing their dynamics, seeking out the weak points in their armor. The wedding photos captured the image of a perfect union, a fairy tale come to life. But behind the smoke and the clinking of champagne glasses, a different story was unfolding. A story of quiet observation, of strategic patience, of a woman who had been underestimated and was now preparing her move. The wedding wasn't the end of my journey with Marcus and his family. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where I would play their game, learn their rules, and use their own arrogance against them. The veil of romance had been lifted by the harsh reality of the prenup, replaced by a steely resolve. I was marrying into their world, and I would dismantle it from within. They had invited me to their grand performance, but they had no idea I was about to steal the show. Married life in the Van Allen world was a performance. Every day felt like I was on stage, expected to play the part of the perfect Van Allen wife. The opulent apartment, the endless social engagements, the constant need to uphold appearances, it was suffocating. And the man I had married, the charming, attentive Marcus, seemed to fade further into the background. The cracks I had noticed before the wedding didn't just widen. They became gaping chasms. Marcus became cold, controlling, and increasingly dismissive of my feelings, my opinions, even my career. The man who had made me feel like the center of the universe now made me feel like an accessory, an addition to his already polished life. It was as if the mask of love had completely come off, and what was left was a miniature clone of his father, calculating, self-absorbed, and driven solely by greed and status. Our conversations became transactional. He would talk about business deals, market fluctuations, the latest acquisitions, but there was no genuine connection, no intimacy. He expected me to be decorative, to attend events, to smile and look presentable, but my thoughts, my work, my life outside of being Mrs. Van Allen held no interest for him. His dismissiveness extended to my friends, my family, my past. He would make cutting remarks about Miami, about my upbringing, subtly reminding me of the gap between our worlds. Vivian and Charles continued their passive-aggressive campaign, their smiles never quite reaching their eyes. They seemed emboldened by the prenup, confident in their control. They treated me with a chilling politeness that felt more like contempt. But while they were comfortable in their gilded cage, oblivious to the true state of my affairs, I was busy. Every cold shoulder, every condescending remark, every argument that revealed Marcus's true nature, I started documenting it all. Not in a diary, not emotionally, but clinically, strategically. I kept a detailed, time-stamped record of conversations, significant interactions, and instances of his controlling behavior. Saved emails, screenshots of texts, even voice memos of his dismissive tones. This wasn't about documenting a failing marriage. It was about building a case. I also started paying closer attention to the things they talked about, the snippets of information they carelessly let slip. Business deals, overseas projects, financial maneuvers. I listened intently, connecting the dots, filing away details. I learned about their companies, their investments, their strategies. I was like a spy in plain sight, their unsuspecting daughter-in-law, quietly observing and collecting intelligence. The voicemails from Vivian were particularly telling. They were often seemingly innocuous messages about social events or family dinners, but beneath the surface, they were loaded with expectations, veiled criticisms, and a constant pressure on Marcus to uphold the family name and wealth. They were a window into the controlling dynamic that shaped Marcus and, by extension, our marriage. I saved every single one. The charming facade Marcus had presented to me had completely crumbled, revealing the cold, hard truth beneath. He wasn't the man I fell in love with. He was a product of his environment, molded by his parents' ambition and greed. The gilded cage wasn't just where the Van Allens lived, it was where they lived their lives, trapped by their own wealth and expectations. And I was now inside that cage with them. They thought they had secured their assets and future with the prenup. They thought they were in control. But with each passing day, with each documented conversation and loaded voicemail, they were unknowingly providing me with the very tools I needed to set myself free and bring their carefully constructed world crashing down around them. The cracks in their gold frame were multiplying, and I was the one carefully identifying them. Living inside the Van Allen compound, observing their every move, listening to their conversations, was like being on a battlefield. But instead of tanks and soldiers, the weapons were whispers, coded language, and the manipulation of information. This wasn't a fight I could win head-on. I had to employ the art of war. It required strategy, patience, and the ability to leverage unexpected resources. My first key alliance came from an unlikely source, Marcus's cousin, Eliza Van Allen. Unlike the rest of the family, Eliza had always been a bit of a rebel, the black sheep who openly bristled at the Van Allens' rigid rules and elitism. She was an artist, living a much more unconventional life than her cousins, and she'd always had a quiet resentment for the family's obsession with wealth and status. I had met her briefly at a few family gatherings before the wedding, and she always seemed to offer a knowing, slightly sarcastic smile in my direction. After the wedding, as Marcus became more distant and the family's condescension grew, I started seeking out Eliza. We connected over shared artistic interests, and slowly, cautiously, I began to share some of my frustrations. Eliza, with her insider's perspective, saw the Van Allens for what they were, and she didn't like it. She had her own grievances against the family, years of being marginalized and dismissed. She became my unexpected confidant, my eyes and ears inside their inner circle. She provided invaluable insights into family dynamics, hidden rivalries, and the areas where the Van Allens were most vulnerable. Another crucial piece of the puzzle came through one of Marcus's old college friends. I bumped into him at a social event, and we started talking. He wasn't part of the tightly controlled family business, and he spoke with a casual candor that was refreshing after the constant guardedness of the Van Allens. He mentioned offhandedly some shady stuff Marcus was involved in back in his college days, something about offshore accounts and creative accounting for family businesses. He didn't know the details, but the mention of offshore accounts piqued my interest. But the most significant breakthrough came from the least likely person, David Romero, the family accountant. David was a quiet, nervous man who seemed perpetually stressed. He'd been with the Van Allens for years, handling their complicated finances. During a particularly tense family dinner where Charles and Marcus were discussing a complex business deal involving overseas properties, I saw David flinch. Later, when Marcus had stepped away and Vivian was distracted, I approached David under the pretense of asking about a tax document. I could tell he was uncomfortable, on edge. In a moment of what I can only assume was pure stress or a subconscious desire to unburden himself, he accidentally let slip a few damning phrases. Those offshore accounts. The discrepancies in the ledgers. It's getting harder to manage. He immediately clamped up, his eyes wide with panic, realizing he had said too much. But it was enough. The mention of offshore accounts, discrepancies, and the implicit fear in his voice painted a clear picture. Marcus and Charles were hiding assets, likely to avoid taxes or worse. Oh, how poetic. The family so obsessed with protecting their wealth, so determined. Mine to ensure I would leave with nothing was built on a foundation of hidden accounts and questionable financial practices. This wasn't just unethical. It was illegal, and proving it would not only expose their hypocrisy but also, crucially, provide grounds to challenge that ironclad prenup. With Eliza providing insider information, Marcus's old friend confirming the existence of overseas accounts, and David Romero confirming the discrepancies, I had the beginnings of a solid case. It was like gathering pieces of a complicated puzzle. Each alliance, each piece of overheard information, was a stepping stone towards building undeniable proof of their illicit activities. The art of war wasn't just about fighting. It was about intelligence gathering, strategic alliances, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And that moment was drawing closer with the information I had gathered from Eliza, Marcus's former friend, and especially David Romero's accidental confession. I knew I had enough to build something substantial. I had retained my own legal team, a discreet but formidable group who understood the complexities of white-collar crime and international finance. They helped me piece together the fragmented information, connecting the dots between the Van Allen family's public image and their hidden financial dealings. Their offshore accounts, the discrepancies David mentioned, it all pointed towards something far more serious than just tax evasion. It hinted at embezzlement, at siphoning funds from legitimate business ventures and hiding them away in complex dummy corporations overseas. This wasn't just about wealth preservation. It was about illicit gain. My legal team confirmed my suspicions. They helped me understand the legal ramifications, the potential consequences for the Van Allens, and most importantly, how their illegal activities could impact the validity of the prenup. A contract, even an ironclad one, could be challenged if one party engaged in criminal behavior. Now came the most crucial part: orchestrating the play. I needed to expose them, not just within the family, but publicly, in a way that couldn't be dismissed or covered up. I also needed them to unknowingly participate in their own downfall. I decided to leverage my background in art and my recent inheritance. I proposed hosting a private charity auction at the Van Allen estate, a grand event designed to raise funds for a prominent arts foundation. Vivian and Charles, always eager to enhance their public image, readily agreed. They saw it as another opportunity to showcase their wealth and philanthropy. Little did they know, it was also an opportunity for me. I curated the auction, featuring stunning pieces from renowned artists. And then, for the grand finale, I included several significant works from my personal €25 million portfolio. I framed it to the Van Allens as my contribution, a way to give back and solidify my place within the family's charitable endeavors. They were thrilled, seeing it as a sign that I was finally embracing their world and contributing to their legacy. The night of the auction was a glittering success. The estate was filled with their usual crowd of wealthy donors and socialites. Marcus, Vivian, and Charles were in their element, schmoozing, accepting praise for their generosity. I played my part, smiling, mingling, directing attention to the artwork. As the auction reached its climax, showcasing the pieces from my collection, the bidding was fierce. The Van Allens beamed, taking credit for the significant funds being raised. And then came the crucial moment. To facilitate the transfer of funds and for tax purposes, there were documents to sign. Documents related to the donated artwork. Documents I had cleverly drafted with my legal team. These weren't just standard tax forms. Woven throughout the legal language were clauses, carefully crafted, that tied the proceeds of the art sale directly to the Van Allens' corporate entities, the very entities involved in their hidden overseas accounts. By signing these documents, they were unknowingly creating a direct, undeniable link between the publicly laudable charity event and their clandestine financial activities. The documents were a roadmap, a clear trail of complicity. They signed them without a second thought. too caught up in the glow of public adulation and the success of the auction to scrutinize the dense legal text. They trusted that their accountant and their daughter-in-law were handling things correctly. They were so confident in their control, so blind in their arrogance that they didn't see the trap I had meticulously laid. That night, as the champagne flowed and the last bids were placed, they celebrated their triumph, completely unaware that they had just signed over the evidence that would expose their hidden embezzlement and dismantle the very empire they had been so desperate to protect. The ultimate play had been executed perfectly, right under their noses. The stage was set for the explosion.th emails and communications related to the charity auction, containing the signed documents that linked the Van Allens' public philanthropy to their private, illegal accounts were delivered to the appropriate federal authorities. My legal team had carefully prepared everything, ensuring the evidence was clear, undeniable, and pointed directly to Marcus and Charles Van Allen. The explosion didn't happen with a bang, but with a calculated implosion. It started subtly, with hushed rumors swirling through the financial district. Whispers about an investigation, about frozen assets, about the Van Allen name being mentioned in connection with irregularities. Then, on a Monday morning, the rumors became front-page news. Federal investigators raided the Van Allen offices. Allegations of embezzlement, tax fraud, and money laundering were splashed across headlines. Subpoenas were issued. Assets were frozen. The carefully constructed facade of the Van Allen empire began to crumble. Vivian was reportedly devastated, more concerned about the social scandal and the tarnished family name than the actual crimes. Charles was stoic, attempting damage control, but the evidence was too compelling. And Marcus was reeling. The confident heir, the man who thought he was untouchable, was suddenly facing the very real prospect of federal charges and prison time. In the midst of the chaos, their lawyer, Mr. Sterling, contacted my legal team. The Van Allens were in damage control mode, their priorities shifting from protecting their fortune from me to protecting themselves from prosecution. And the prenup, the ironclad document that was supposed to ensure I left with nothing? It became a liability. Because Marcus had committed federal crimes during the marriage, his illegal activities were considered a breach of the marital contract and, significantly, had potentially tainted marital assets even though my personal wealth was untouched. My legal team successfully argued that due to his violation of federal law, the prenup was voided by court order. It was a victory not just based on my secret wealth, but on their criminal actions. While the Van Allens were busy navigating the storm of allegations and legal proceedings, I remained quietly detached. I watched from a distance as their world imploded. The phone calls Marcus made were desperate, accusatory. He couldn't understand how this was happening, how his carefully guarded world had been exposed. He blamed everyone but himself. He certainly didn't suspect me. They were so convinced of their own cleverness in imposing the prenup, so assured of my lack of resources, that the idea I had coordinated this entire operation never crossed their minds. Even better than the prenup being voided, my secret 25 million euros trust remained completely untouched by the Van Allens' legal troubles. It was separate, clean, and fully under my control. While their assets were frozen and their future looked bleak, my financial security was absolute. The controlled explosion had worked. It had exposed their corruption, initiated legal proceedings that would likely lead to their financial ruin, and simultaneously invalidated the very document they had used to try and control me. The gilded cage they had trapped me in was shattering, not from the outside, but from the rot they had allowed to fester within. And I was walking out, not penniless as they had intended, but with my own substantial fortune secure. The stage was now set for the quiet, final act of my departure. TG Day, I served Marcus the divorce papers was the day of his initial tax indictment hearing. It wasn't a coincidence. My legal team advised it was the most impactful moment, a public declaration of the end of our marriage coinciding with the official beginning of his legal troubles. I dressed simply, professionally. No ornate gowns, no displays of wealth. Competence and quiet resolve. I walked into the courthouse, the air heavy with tension and the hushed murmuring of reporters. Marcus was there, flanked by his parents and a phalanx of lawyers, looking pale and anxious. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by a nervous twitch. I approached him calmly, a small envelope in my hand. His eyes widened in recognition, then narrowed with apprehension. Vivian and Charles stiffened, their faces masks of disbelief and fury. In the middle of the crowded hallway, under the gaze of onlookers and flashing cameras, I handed Marcus the envelope. He took it as if it might explode. I saw the word divorce printed clearly on the top document. His jaw clenched, his eyes flashing with a mix of anger and something I hadn't seen in a long time of vulnerability. But it was too late for that. I simply looked at him, a small, unreadable smile playing on my lips. Then I turned and walked away. I didn't say a word. Just like I had signed the prenup in silence, I left the marriage in silence, leaving him to face the consequences of his actions and the crumbling of his world. The divorce proceedings were swift, almost perfunctory, thanks to the court's voiding of the prenup. But even without it, my objective wasn't their money. They had tried to strip me of everything, to ensure I left with nothing. So when it came to the settlement, I told my lawyers exactly what I wanted. Nothing. No share of the Van Allen real estate empire, no monthly payments, no access to their accounts. They were so desperate to tie up loose ends and minimize the impact of the scandal that my apparent lack of financial demands almost seemed suspicious to them. They couldn't fathom that I wasn't after their fortune. But I did ask for one thing. One specific asset they owned. The beachfront estate in Montauk. It wasn't the most valuable property in their portfolio, not by a long shot. In fact, early in our relationship, I had expressed how much I admired its rustic charm, its stunning views, and the way it felt so different from the sterile perfection of their city properties. Marcus and his parents had subtly mocked my appreciation for it then, seeing it as less prestigious, less Van Allen. So I asked for the Montauk estate. And in their haste to be rid of me and focus on their much larger legal battles, they signed it over. They probably saw it as a small price to pay to make me disappear quietly. Another instance of them underestimating me, of them not seeing the true value in things. Today, I stand on the porch of that Montauk estate. The salty air fills my lungs, and the waves crash against the shore. It's peaceful here, a world away from the concrete jungle and the cold elegance of New York. And I own it, free and clear. Along with the €25 million in legacy wealth from my grandmother's trust, untouched by any of the Van Allen's legal woes. Fine art lines the walls, not borrowed for a charity auction, but owned. My own private collection. And them? Marcus, Vivian, Charles? The scandal broke their public image. The legal battles drained their resources. Accusations of embezzlement and tax evasion led to investigations, lawsuits, and ultimately the slow, painful dismantling of their real estate empire. They are facing significant financial ruin and the social ostracization they so desperately avoided. Bankrupt, their name tarnished, they are now well on their way to becoming forgotten, just another cautionary tale in the city of excess. They tried to make sure I'd leave with nothing. And I did. But only after making sure they were the ones left standing at the edge of financial ruin. It wasn't about the money for me, not really. It was about the principle. About showing them that being underestimated can be a powerful weapon. About proving that genuine worth isn't measured in dollars and cents, but in resilience, intelligence, and the quiet accumulation of your own power. They thought I was powerless, but I outplayed them all. They tried to make sure I'd leave with nothing, and I did, but only after making sure they were the ones left standing at the edge of financial ruin. Don't forget to like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe, because Karma, she takes her time, but she always knows what she's doing.